There's always been a divide between console and handheld. I mean, of course there has. One's big and is fed by constant electricity, and the other one is small and gulps down little reserved battery babies. The handhelds would usually get adapted console ports from 2 or 3 generations ago, like A Link to the Past on GBA or Mario 64 on DS. And being able to take those console games on the go, no matter how old they were, is a valuable pillar of any handheld. The two halves of a handheld system, the original games and the older console ports. There were always those wow moments of like, damn, this game that once pushed the capabilities of the entire industry is now sitting in the palm of my hands. I felt that on 3DS, on PSP, on Vita, and with the fourth Super Smash Bros. Game, Nintendo gave us their first concept of hybrid design. Smash for 3DS and Wii U are two separate games in content, but identical in gameplay. I spent an equal amount of time on both versions, playing the Wii U game on the sofa and the 3DS game portably or in bed. They were an extension of the same experience. The Wii U itself was a glimpse into hybrid design, being able to take the game entirely onto the tablet and freeing up the TV for anything else, though you can't get very far from the console without losing connection. That didn't stop people trying to make it into a portable console. Does it count as portable if it's plugged into the wall? Nintendo were in a very tricky position. Outside of the Wii and DS, where they hit upon a double dose of industry-flipping innovation, they were on a constant decline. Every console and handheld that followed the last did worse and worse. They could keep gambling on a new gimmick that may or may not hit, or they could pave a new path for themselves, something they'd already been dipping their toe in, taking their two shrinking markets and combining them to form a brand new, growing one. That landed on Nintendo Switch. By all means and purposes, the Switch is a tablet. Pull off those Joy-Con and see how naked it really is. This new form factor allowed Nintendo to offer a drastic jump in power from their other mobile devices. As a handheld, Switch is a monumental leap from 3DS, and as a console, it's also pretty far ahead of Wii U. Essentially, every Wii U game, apart from a few like Smash, ran at 720p, or 921,600 pixels. But the Switch runs these Wii U games at 1080p, or 2,073,600 pixels. Games that could have never ran on the Wii U, like Doom or Nier Automata or The Witcher 3, found their way over. It's not a powerful home console, but it's still the strongest Nintendo's ever made, and it's supported by pretty much every modern engine. But as a handheld, especially in 2017, what it could do was breathtaking. It's easy to forget that in 2025, when we get occasional ports like this or this or this. Asking developers who are using the PS5 as a ceiling to also scale their games to a mobile chip that was released in 2015 is a large ask, and a lot of the time it doesn't go very well. But when a game is actually made with the Switch in mind, the results can be stunning. Breath of the Wild and the Switch owe so much to each other. Neither would have blown up without the other's perfect balance. The game itself was a genre-changing must-play full of surprises, intrigue, and improvisation that was so easy to clip and share with others, and the hardware cuts the restraints off. You don't need to dedicate yourself to play Breath of the Wild. You just pick it up in handheld mode and play in small chunks. Play while traveling. Play in the bath. Play while falling out of the sky. No game demonstrated hybrid design better, while also being as masterful of a game as this. You could have nothing but a Switch and Breath of the Wild, and you'd get the entire system. Now, I know what you're thinking. John, the PSP was technically a hybrid system. Look. Switch didn't invent nothing. And true, the PSP Go even had a TV dock. You can sync a DualShock 3 to a PSP Go and have a Switch-style experience. But graphical fidelity finally reached a level in this era where handheld games just looked good on a TV, passable as full-on console games, while also being wrapped in a far more elegant experience than hooking up a PSP with component cables. And I know PSP Go could do more than that, but who had a PSP Go? But that's not the end of it. Switch is a Swiss Army knife of a console. The month after Breath of the Wild, we got the 70 million seller Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and this showed us more secret sauce. The Switch is such an elegant design, but it is a feat of engineering when you think about it. You've got these detachable controllers that you can slide on for handheld mode or slide off for TV, but you can also flip your controllers on their side and suddenly they offer multiplayer anywhere. No one is carrying multiple controllers around with them, so this is such a great solution. This kind of controller has its limits because there's way less buttons and only one stick, but for simply steering around and throwing items and accelerating and drifting, there's no better showcase. I've been huddled around this thing with my wife so many times, both with a controller in hand, in an airport lounge, or on trains. I've even lived the dream of a rooftop. It wasn't really a party, but I was on a rooftop with the Switch and that's all I want in life. Now, the Joy-Con have issues, especially with controller drift. And as a compromise for them being two full controllers, there's no traditional D-pad. But there's so much packed into these little things. There's gyro and accelerometers, allowing these to become basically Wii remotes. This gave us games like Switch Sports and Skyward Sword HD, and it enhances traditional games as well like Splatoon, giving us motion for aiming. There's HD Rumble, not only giving us vibrations on a handheld for the first time, but new levels of it, like feeling balls in the controller in 1-2 Switch, and that's the only 1-2 Switch praise in this video, and feeling out specific moons in Odyssey. HD Rumble frequencies can even play songs. It wasn't done much, but it's always funny when it happens. And that little thing on the bottom of the right Joy-Con, the IR camera. This brought Labo to life, reading little string pulls to somehow simulate a piano. It can even read your hand gestures in brain training to do rock, paper, scissors, or calculate using your fingers. And in Ring Fit Adventure, it even brought back the vitality sensor, and it read your pulse. And if you've got multiple Switches, a few games support Mosaic mode, where you can line them up together to create multiple screens that bleed into each other. This was mostly just Clubhouse games and Super Mario Party, but it's super rad. 8 different controllers can be connected to one system, giving you the raddest version of Virtual Eraser ever. Incredibly easy 8-player Smash, or Bomberman, or Mario Strikers Battle League Football. There's not really one factor that made the Switch cool. Yeah, you can switch between playing on the TV or taking it anywhere, but there's so much more that no other system does. For those games that were built with the Switch in mind but ported everywhere else, there's rarely a reason not to stick with the Switch. It's just the easier place to play. And with Nintendo populating gyro aiming in games like Zelda, Splatoon, or even Mario, many third parties have optional gyro exclusive to the Switch version. And even though they're compromised in other ways, I still kinda prefer playing on Switch because of the gyro controls. As of this recording, the Switch has been around for 8 years, and thinking about what's happened in my life since then, it's pretty vast. I started my career in talking about video games, I graduated university, I got married, I've had 2 kids, one with health complications, and with all that, I don't really get a whole lot of TV time to myself. Ever, really. And so I've always preferred handhelds. They're just easier to play. And with the Switch, it let me continue to play all these games. I also got a voice acting role in my first video game on the Switch. That was super rad. There's so many memories tied to the lifespan of this system. So much can happen in just 8 years. Through this whole generation, I've had less time than I ever have, but I've played more than I ever have. I bought more than I ever have, don't tell my wife. Playing games on the Switch is just easy. It's easy to find the time, it's easy to quickly boot it up, it's easy to put it down with a physical standby button on the console and then pick it back up again. You can call this a pause button in Dark Souls. It finally has one, we can stop arguing. I was enamored by everything the Switch was in 2017, and it kept getting better and better as more massive games kept releasing, and they never really stopped. Switch had one or multiple first-party games practically every month of its life in a time where the competition could barely handle more than a small handful. And unlike the Wii U, which only Nintendo really supported, for the first time in an extremely long time, third parties flocked to Nintendo. That doesn't mean that every game that came to PS4 or Xbox One had a Switch version, but when it was possible, it was done. Sometimes, even when it couldn't be done, it was done, but I don't want to talk about these, there's only like 20 of them. That they're a non-entity, really. But as someone who loves playing old games on handhelds, Switch was one of the rare instances where it could pull off stuff from the existing generation. Not often, but it could. Doom, Wolfenstein New Colossus, Dragon Quest XI, Nier Automata, Crash Bandicoot 4. And in a time where pushing graphical limits is causing the industry to eat itself, having a low-spec machine was amazing. It allowed for games like Octopath Traveler that are still beautiful, even without costing multiple millions of hundreds of dollars. This game obviously targeted the Switch, but it was ported everywhere else. Neo, The World Ends With You. It's also a PS4 game, but would it exist without the Switch? Almost certainly not. It allowed for sort of a AA rebirth, and I really hope Switch 2 being more capable doesn't kill that. I love seeing games like Harvestella, Theater Rhythm, and Unicorn Overlord all pretty much born out of the Switch being low spec. It benefited everyone, even non-Switch owners. But it's also fascinating to see older games that still feel pretty modern running on a portable. I know the Xbox 360 launched 20 years ago, but damn, it's still new in my soul. And seeing Portal, Skyrim, Dark Souls, Red Dead Redemption, BioShock, Resident Evil 5? It blows my mind, man. I used to play those games and say graphics won't get better than this. And you know what? BioShock's water still looks really good. With Switch being a serious home for legacy games, it caused a few publishers to end their loyalties with specific platforms. Switch was the catalyst that made Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 go multi-platform, and it's still mind-blowing to me that I have Final Fantasy 7 on a cartridge. The person who wrote this must apologize now. I can play the PS1 Crash and Spyro games, the PS1 Tomb Raiders, Metal Gear Solid, Persona 3, 4, and 5. 5 took its sweet time. GTA 3, Vice City and San Andreas, Onimusha, Devil May Cry. All these games and franchises, some that never had a mainline game on Nintendo before, finally embracing them. There was that feeling of, if it can run, we'll bring it over. So games like Stalker 2 obviously can't run, but the older 3 PC Stalker games? But yeah, we'll do those. We can't do Baldur's Gate 3, but the other Baldur's Gate games? Sure. Even Xbox games started coming to Switch way back in 2019. This was an unpredictable era where everyone was sharing their games. Even Nintendo kinda did on the Nvidia Shield in China, but nowhere else. And after 8 years, Nintendo managed to publish an overwhelming number of games, and many of these iterations are the best their franchises ever had. Both Mario Odyssey and Bowser's Fury are miraculously designed, offering different takes on 3D Mario's sandbox, while also making Mario more slick than he's ever been. Especially Odyssey, that game oozes slick. You've forgotten. You must play it again and you'll say, man, this is slick. Mario was rampant on the Switch. We had Mario Maker 2, the excellent Mario Wonder, 3 Mario parties, all of which are good, 4 sports games, and Aces being my favorite Mario sports game or any sports game ever, and a wild 6 RPGs. We need to respect Mario plus Rabbids more, by the way. We've normalized how weird it is for Mario to be shooting Rabbids in a tactical RPG, and Sparks of Hope in particular rocks so frickin' hard. Zelda had an incredible run too. 2 of the most iconic games of all time. A super inventive return to 2D Zelda, a remake of one of the most iconic games in the series, and they even handed the keys to an indie studio with Cadence of Hyrule. A wonderful blend of Zelda dungeon crawling with rhythm-based movement. This game is going to be a huge hidden gem in a few years. Take my word now.
I've had a lot of people ask me if I prefer Fire Emblem Three Houses or Fire Emblem Engage, and honestly between the two, I would say Engage is the one that personally has stuck with me the most. This is a game that harkens more back to the Game Boy Advance era of titles and before then, so it feels strangely nostalgic for me. That's when I got into the series. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't really take it too seriously. They didn't give it a fair chance because of the characters, because of the story. But the gameplay itself is probably the strongest in the series, and it's also an anniversary title, so that means a lot of fan service for me as a fan.
Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Kirby finally made his way to 3D with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and HAL Laboratory nailed it on the first try. It's a great translation of what 2D Kirby is in that 3D space, and because it's in a 3D space, it feels a lot more epic and big. It has incredible boss fights, an awesome story, and it's a great way to play co-op, even if player 2 is stuck only being Bandana Waddle Dee. It also continued this weird trend of first-party Nintendo games having theme songs.
Dragon Quest XI is the answer to somebody bemoaning the fact that they want a traditional RPG in the modern age. It is that RPG. It is classic in the sense of every word, but it's also modern in its graphical representation and just the sheer amount of content there is in this game. It is a compelling story the entire way through, one that kept me absolutely engrossed with so much extra content that frankly it's staggering at times, and yet I did it all because it's just that fun.
You can't have a video like this without at least mentioning ARMS. ARMS just never got the love that it deserved, and that's crazy to say about a game that I believe sold over 1 million copies, but it is one of the best fighting games out there. And if you compare it just to what's on the Switch, it is one of the best looking fighting games that exists on the platform. It has gorgeous graphics, interesting characters, and mechanics that sneakily teach you about the core concepts of the fighting game genre, about maintaining distance, about reading your opponents, and the movement and mechanics are so tight that even 7-8 years on, I can't get enough of it. There are people on my friends list who play this every day to this day. It is one of the most original fighting games to ever have been created, and it tackled the problem that the industry itself was trying to solve of how to make fighting games more approachable years before Capcom figured it out with Street Fighter 6.
Pikmin had my favourite game with Pikmin 4, and they brought the entire series along with ports of 1, 2, and 3. There's still hope for Hey Pikmin, that can still happen. And the same happened with Xenoblade. Original games and expansions for 2 and 3, both phenomenal and arguably the best. I can't decide what my favourite is. And then remasters of 1 and X. So you've got 1, 2, 3, and X, and Future Redeemed, and Future Connected, and Torna. You can't stop Monolith Soft. There's a lot of instances where with ports and retro NSO editions, the entirety of Nintendo lines are playable on the Switch. Like, you can play every numerical Metroid. You miss Samus Returns, but you can still do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and every DKC and LAN game. It's cool that they keep building this, and it's just going to get more and more elaborate as Switch 2 does more of this. The entire Bayonetta series is here, though 2's still the best one. Well done, Wii U. 3's okay, but Astral Chain was my platinum delight of this gen. Astral Chain is so good.
Metroid Dread is such a special title. This one single-handedly got me interested and invested in looking at more of the Metroidvania titles on the Switch. It also helped to characterize Samus so well. I think Mercury Steam really understands that character and portrays her so masterfully. It's got the atmosphere, the vibes, the challenge, everything down to how Samus contextually interacts with the world around her while playing. And it's Metroid 5, and it was called Metroid Dread. For those in the know, that was such a special reveal for all of us.
You're probably expecting me to say Monster Hunter Rise, but actually, it's Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. Generations Ultimate continues the 4th generation of Monster Hunter, while Rise goes ahead into the 5th generation. Generations Ultimate is the last classic Monster Hunter. It serves as a greatest hits of generations 1 through 4. So if you're curious about what Monster Hunter used to be like, then Generations Ultimate is the way to go.
Spiritfarer is the type of game that I normally wouldn't try out, but ended up absolutely loving. The aesthetics are wonderful, the feels are massive, and it's just a solid time throughout. And in a lot of ways, the signal that the Switch was really built for indies. The indie scene held up the Switch during that first year in a massive way, just kept releasing hit after hit that people wanted to try out, and fostered this community of indie development that still thrives to this day. I've bought so many more indie games for the Switch than I have on any other console ever, probably cumulatively. There are so many great indie games on the Switch, and all of them are obviously available on other systems as well, but Spiritfarer stands out to me as just one of the best.
I've been saying this since March 2017, and I'll take this opportunity to say it again. If you're looking for a game that gives you the most bang for your buck in terms of hours of play for your dollar, there is no game out there like Disgaea 5. It's true of the whole Disgaea series, but Disgaea 5 is my favorite game in the franchise, and I've played them all. If you like tactics games like Final Fantasy Tactics, you will absolutely adore this game. Disgaea has this genre nailed down. It's my favorite example of a tactical RPG, and they keep hammering these out, and each one offers literally thousands of hours of gameplay.
And Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, oh boy, we can talk about Smash Ultimate forever. Every single fighter is back from across the entire series, practically every stage, and though it seems like a big compilation game, it ended up being so much more, with more new fighter additions than any other game in the series. And if you haven't gone back to play Smash 4 and then try Ultimate again, you should, because they feel so different. Ultimate has so many cool gameplay evolutions like parrying out of a shield, or quickly jumping into air attacks, or completely changing the rules of the game by giving characters like Hero a menu to attack. It's a wild, wild game, and something I played through the whole life cycle. We take this game for granted, like we do not appreciate how big and how much Smash Ultimate really does. And as much as the Switch gets mocked, and pretty rightfully so, there's zero communication options at all outside of the online app which no one uses, it still housed my most frequently played online games of this era. Mario Kart and Smash are obvious ones, but I played so much Mario Tennis Aces online. The rules of that game offer an infinite amount of potential and it never gets old, and we have to talk about the 99 games. Only 2 exist now, but Mario 35 and Pac-Man 99 were godly, let it be known. Tetris 99 might be one of the best games ever made. You take a timeless masterpiece and turn it into a battle royale game where no matter where you come, you've beaten someone. There's always that one more game feeling, and it's so intense when like 8 players all target you and throw their garbage your way, but then you clear your lines and throw it straight back at them in a huge quantity. There's nothing like playing Tetris 99. It's easily a top 5 Switch game for me.
If you know anybody out there who claims that F-Zero 99 is not a true new entry into the series, they're wrong. It may not be your traditional F-Zero game and it might be taking aspects from the other 99 titles on the Switch, but that doesn't make it any less special. It takes aspects from F-Zero for the Super Nintendo, all the way through to F-Zero Climax on the Game Boy Advance, and taking a lot of things in between like the Satellaview games, and puts it all together into one special title that's like a celebration of F-Zero. I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a stepping stone to see what the fans think of the series now in the year 2024, 2025, and going forward. And after seeing how much the passion for F-Zero has ignited after 99, I'm very curious to see where it's going to go from here.
The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is a great Switch entry in the Legend of Zelda series. It's the most unique of the original Switch Zelda games available, and both serves as a great return to form while also being something entirely brand new. Getting to play as Zelda and create copies of all of the objects and enemies throughout the world of Hyrule really created a lot of incredible puzzle solutions and ways to traverse the land.
You know we couldn't make a video like this without mentioning Super Mario Odyssey. It's basically the Switch's Super Mario 64. Nintendo even related it to both 64 and Sunshine when they announced the game, and I have to say, nearly 8 years on, that holds true. I can mention it in the same breath as those titles. In fact, I'd even go further and say that I love Odyssey almost as much as I love Super Mario Galaxy, which is my favorite 3D Mario game of all time. Nintendo smashed it out of the park here. The worlds, the varieties, the personality infused into this game is unlike anything else in the Mario series to date, and really, I just can't wait to see where they take it from here.
And man, the niche games of the Switch. Flippin' Another Code came back. I love these games, and while it's positioned as a remake, this is a brand new game. It tells the same story, but everything is different and reformatted. They just snuck a new Another Code game into the old Another Codes. And Famicom Detective Club. Iconic Nintendo franchises from the mind behind Metroid finally localized in the West. And the Go stands, in particular, one of the coolest stories in games. But then, MEO, a third totally new Famicom Detective Club. And forget what I just said, this is one of the coolest stories in games. I'm still thinking about it constantly. Advance Wars came back. Endless Ocean came back, and you can swim around with 30 people. You've probably heard this is bad, but I find it really chill, and I honestly quite like it a lot. And Cruisin' came back with Cruisin' Blast, which, yeah, Nintendo still own the rights to, and it rocked, it flippin' rocked. And Pokemon Snap came back. My wife has played this for 100 hours. It's a delightful game. And speaking of Pokemon, Pokemon had a rough transition into HD. In fairness, I actually like a chunk of the games, and all of them were ambitiously different. Let's Go got rid of random encounters and changed how wild battles work. Sword and Shield had the wild area, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were just traditional Pokemon, and then Scarlet and Violet went full-on open world. Hell, Legends as well, the coolest one with a bunch of action game elements layered on top of turn-based Pokemon. There were definitely missteps, but the core of every Pokemon game was different on Switch, and you can't really say that for any other Nintendo handheld. Pokemon has never exactly been an impressive technical feat, but now that the games can be blown up onto a TV, it just doesn't look very good. I mean, Let's Go can, but areas of Sword and Shield and pretty much all of Scarlet and Violet are pretty uggo, and when this is what a huge chunk of the user base plays, it's not a good look for the console or the franchise. I do think the Pokemon cycle is going to come along and people will reflect more fondly on some of these, but it was a pretty volatile time to be a fan of the series. It really isn't a good look when Breath of the Wild introduced everyone to the Switch with a really pretty game, and then years later, we get this. Hell, some games, like Luigi's Mansion 3, are outright some of the best looking games we've ever had. And I'm not just talking about the Switch or hardware limitations. This game is so beautiful, and it's animated like a flippin' movie. And Metroid Prime Remastered, I mean, it's a remaster of a GameCube game, yes, but it looks like something you'd expect to see from PlayStation 5 while also hitting 60 FPS. It's unreasonable what some developers got out of this little tablet. How is Monster Hunter Rise looking this good running on a mobile chip from 2015? These are questions that keep me up at night. Other questions keep me up at night too. Like, how did Nier Automata go from 50 gigabytes on PlayStation 4 to 10.9 gigs on Switch? A lot of developers were really mindful of storage limitations, probably to get a cheaper cartridge, but it's still nice for digital users too. And one thing I never take for granted with the Switch is you can just turn the console on, put a game in, and go. No installs, no mandatory updates. Everything just works quickly and smoothly. You can realistically never get a micro SD card and just live off a physical library. Who's gonna stop you? This guy? No way! Although, if you do go digital, you are going to need a micro SD card. That 32 gigs or 64 gigabyte internal memory, that's going to fill up pretty quickly. I also really like how you select a profile when booting a game up, rather than dedicating yourself to individual logins every single time. It makes sharing the system super easy, and you get a really big library together. And now, I'm less sure why other systems don't work like this. I much prefer it. I often ask myself the question of whether the Switch is the best Nintendo console, and I think the answer is yeah. With most other Nintendo systems, it's very easy for everyone, especially enthusiasts, to play the exact same games because usually the library is so limited. But here, that's not even the case when you just limit it to the first-party output. Some of my favorite games of all time came from the Switch, like Xenoblade 3, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey, Tetris 99, Metroid Dread, Emio, Pikmin 4. I can keep listing games, but then there's also the really cool stuff like Astral Chain and Sushi Striker and Ring Fit Adventure, and I'm just listing games again. It's easy to view the Switch library as a fostering ground for the Wii U's greatest hits, but there's so much more than that, so much beyond that. It is great that more people get to play some of the Wii U's best games, because very few people did, and now you can all play Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Though Wii U still wins with Project Zero Maiden of Blackwater, we didn't get the Zelda and Samus costumes on the Switch. Wii U's always winning. But how much you love your Switch probably comes down to what you played outside of Nintendo, because that's where the variety really came from. Did you play Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, Octopath Traveler 2, Dragon Quest Builders 2? I hope you said yes to all of them. If you like Japanese games in particular, there's so much original stuff to play, and in the indie space, there's practically everything to play. Some might say there's too much, as the eShop rules are so loose that if you've got an in with Nintendo, you can pretty much post whatever horrible thing you want. But we have some of the greatest games ever conceived from the indie scene, like Hollow Knight, Stardew Valley, Celeste, Balatro, Hades, Golf Story. These equally define the Switch as much as any other game. You could never buy a full retail game and play nothing but indie hits, and you'd probably have a better time than anyone. Games are the universal point of Switch. Nintendo Switch does indeed have games. It has the greatest new games, the most flexible way to play legacy games, both with NSO and the huge number of re-releases it got. If you have a Switch, You're gaming, and not even your mother can stop you. We all knew the Switch was something special when it released, but no one could have predicted how good the lineup would get. Maybe it could never become a primary all-in-one console when there's so much AAA stuff it just can't run, but there's so much choice that maybe that doesn't matter. But because its life went on for so long, that struggling 2015 Tegra chip absolutely started to show its age more and more, even in Nintendo IP. It's true Nintendo didn't develop all its games like Mario and Luigi Brothership, but that game can chug at times. Forever Entertainment made DKC Returns run worse than the Wii game, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was held together by string. Not everyone could optimize like first-party Nintendo, and even they had their share of problems. Bowser's Fury is 30 FPS in handheld and 60 FPS docked, and while loading times were generally pretty acceptable across the board, I don't know what happened in Animal Crossing. It takes ages to boot the game up, and then it loads again, and then it loads again. Look at what you can do while the game's loading. Switch 2 was needed a while ago, but people wouldn't stop buying the standard Switch, and so it just kept on going. Through the years, we've had the standard model, the Lite, which is a cheaper Switch that can't switch, and the OLED with a bigger and better screen. Never a power bump or a Pro, but the battery was revised a few years in, and the Switch OLED can run a game like Breath of the Wild for 5.5 hours. The home button can light up too. It doesn't happen very often, but I thought I'd mention it somewhere. You can set alarms on the Joy-Con for Ring Fit Adventure. The Pro Controller has gone down as one of my all-time favorites in ergonomics and battery life. You get 40 hours of charge, which true isn't Wii U Pro Controller levels of 80 flippin' hours, but what is? And it feels so nice to hold and has parity with most Joy-Con features like gyro and NFC support for Amiibo. I just wish it had analog triggers for racing games, although you can use the GameCube's analog triggers in some racing games, like here in Trials. That's kind of funny. And even though it gives us a proper D-pad, it can be weirdly inconsistent. I'm way better playing Tetris with the Joy-Con split buttons, as the Pro Controller pad is prone to a lot of misdrops. If Switch 2 can improve upon that stuff, then that is the perfect controller. I also love how everything uses USB-C now. The Wii U gamepad had to be plugged into the mains with a proprietary charger, which was so silly, but now the dock, the console, the Pro Controller, just feed it all USB-C. You can charge them with the same wire you use for your phone. It's glorious. And we also had the Joy-Con straps. I barely use these because they always feel so stiff to pull on and off, like they're jammed on there. Not as seamless as just snapping them onto the console. I think the only time I really used them was for Skyward Sword HD to give me a bit more to hold on to. And to be honest, I'm not even sure where my other strap is. Could only find one to show you. At least they gave the individual Joy-Con larger SL and SR buttons, but I don't know if anyone travels around with their straps. But speaking of being difficult to pull off, the opposite is true of my Joy-Con. I've been very lucky with Joy-Con drift, but I've not been lucky with loose rails. With the tiniest force, my Joy-Con slip right off, and sometimes in the middle of a game, that can make the controls unresponsive, especially in an online game. I've never had my console fall to the ground because of this, but it's just pretty annoying to sometimes get disconnects, and I really hope the magnets help a ton with this in Switch 2. It's a shame the Joy-Con are prone to these issues, because there's so much crammed into these tiny controllers. They're impressive, but when you get one of these issues, it undermines everything. And I think that's true for the Switch as a whole. With how much cool stuff the Switch does, a game occasionally comes along where you go, man, this is underpowered, despite it being a breathtaking piece of tech when it came out. Switch can never compete with this. It can barely compete with this. I mean, look at it. It's tiny and old, like an 18-year-old chihuahua. It's in its own little bubble as a mobile console, and nothing else really enters that bubble. I mean, portable PCs started to rise up, but realistically, they're a very small market. We don't know the Steam Deck's numbers, but it sold 1.62 million in its first year. And for reference, over 11 million Switches are estimated to be sold this year, and that's in a time where it's undermined by new hardware and mostly riding on evergreens. Switch and portable PCs aren't really in the same field, but they do offer things that Switch can't, like keeping up with the powerhouse releases. If you've got a Steam Deck, are you buying Sonic X Shadow Generations on that or on the Switch? Probably on the Steam Deck. Time has definitely shaken the Switch hardware up a bit. What was a disruptive force has become a little too old, and so Switch 2 has the easy goal of just picking up the pieces. It already borrows the incredible library. It just needs to tighten up the build quality, up the horsepower, and potentially even get PS5 and Series X games. And that's not a totally unrealistic expectation when Series S is already a bottleneck. This is the screen we've become very familiar with over these 8 years, and you know what? I like it. Switch is bare bones, but every element of this UI and system setup is in the interest of making games quick, and I like it like that. Is 3DS still my favorite OS with its folders and theme customization and all those animated titles? Yeah, for sure it is, but it's also not built with speed in mind. Yeah, the eShop is flavorless without any music, and it's getting slower and slower every year. This thing just blows as a storefront now. And the themes of basic black and basic white have taunted us this whole time, thinking that one day, maybe there'll be more. But there never is. I'm always just a basic white boy. But outside of that stuff, I generally like it. I like the little chirps and clicks. I think they're iconic. I wish we could customize a little more. I mean, we have folders, but they're kind of tucked away. And I don't like how numerical game order sometimes makes some games fall out of their place in the series. What are you doing there, Doom 2016? You are not the second Doom. For that reason, the whole OS is awful. They added an extra circle in the second half of the system's life at the bottom, and it's red unlike the other circles, so it looks weird. Even after all this time, I think it looks weird. And in theory, this app is meant to be cool. You can do a bunch with your NSO benefits and launch into any retro library with a big catalog of games, but just like the eShop, it's pretty slow, and so I'd rather chuck all the systems into a folder and boot them up from there. Speaking of NSO games, Nintendo has absolutely drip-fed us this entire generation. We had nothing but a few NES games at first, but then slowly Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, N64, Game Boy, and Game Boy Advance, and every app is now filled with really great games. It's kind of a no-brainer to subscribe to NSO. I mean, you probably will anyway because it's just a big online paywall, but the extra benefits are genuinely good, and so's the price. I have the expansion pass through the family plan, which means I pay £45 a year, but I divide that across 8 people, so really it's £5.60 for the whole year. Just 1 month of Game Pass is like double that. Oh wait, the price went up. It's triple that. For 1 month. And as part of the retro libraries, you can play it all online with someone. Even the single-player ones, you can just watch someone else play if you want to, or 4 of you can play F-Zero X or Panel de Pon, and Game Boy and GBA are where it gets really interesting, as a kid, I only used link cables for Pokemon. On NSO, I finally got to play the Game Boy Advance 4 Swords with a complete room of people. Same for Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, and even Tetris. NSO is kinda one of my favorite things about the whole console now, honestly. There are still gaps in the libraries, but what is here is great. But that drip feed sure took its damn time. NSO wasn't always like this. It's good now, but in the past, it was debatable about whether it was good. And it wasn't just NSO. Many games weren't free from the drip feed either. The Mario Tennis Aces roster looks banging, but this is how it launched. And Switch Sports is a ton of fun and people still play it today, but it launched without golf or basketball, and both games aren't even new to the series, they're from prior sports games. It was frustrating. It worked for a chunk of games, but others just lost interest entirely, like Mario Strikers Battle League Football. I've been rambling on for a while now, but there is still so much I want to say. Like how cool it is you can easily play vertical games just by flipping the system on its side and balancing on the kickstand, and how Nintendo finally released their arcade games, Arcade Punch-Out, Arcade Mario Brothers, Arcade Donkey Kong, even Sky Skipper, and how cool it is you can just plug in a GameCube controller and literally play any game with it, as long as there's enough buttons to play the game. Switch is so versatile, and while it's got issues, they never really got in the way of the games, unless your character won't stop walking because of the drift. That kind of does get in the way. Just judging it by brand new exclusive first-party games, I think it's better and more varied than any other Nintendo system, and then you pile on everything else, and it's really no contest. Only competitor might be the Super Nintendo, but I'd pretty confidently still say Switch. Some franchises are missing. It's super weird that Donkey Kong only got ports and Star Fox had no appearance beyond a cool bonus in Starlink. Remember Starlink? It was alright. But you can also say that about any Nintendo system. Like, where was Metroid on the N64? Where was Kid Icarus on the GameCube? Even with years of support, there's always going to be gaps. But what is here are some of the finest examples of video games ever made. I don't stick with Switch just because I have little choice in the circumstances of being a tired dad. I stick with Switch because it lets me play the games I actually want to play. I'm still here with this 2017 machine with 2015 hardware because the games are endless. I love the Switch, man. I love all handhelds. I thought it was so cool that Vita could keep up with indie releases, and I love when they have cross-buy and cross-saves with PlayStation 4. But you don't even need to think about that with the Switch. I mean, every game is that by design. I remember Crash Tag Team Racing on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Portable let you carry your save between the two consoles, but there's no need for that anymore. No need to have two different systems or two different games. It's been a long time coming, but the answer to perfecting it was to stop dividing the hardware. Nintendo cannot go back from this. Both their handheld and console markets were dying, and they've made one that's better for everyone. Switch is a net good for the industry, and one of my favorite systems of all time, even if it refused to die.